Strategically, it is important for Russia because, one, it could mean expanding Russia's territory westward and taking Ukraine's territory by taking Donbas, using again this narrative of these ethnic Russians or the Russian speakers to sort of justify the invasion, which has been what we've seen for the last at least 3.5 years. In addition to this, though, beyond Donbas, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Zaporizhia become very important for Russia strategically because it gives them greater access to the Black Sea. As you move westwards in that way, and then even into Odessa, that would essentially cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. So Crimea has already been occupied and annexed for the last several years, as we know. But in addition, taking the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson would allow Russia to essentially, I guess, strangle Ukraine, if you would. I mean, arguably, we would say that actually Russia wants to take all of Ukraine, not just Donetsk. Russia has really showed no indication that it wants to stop this war once it acquires Donetsk and Luhansk. If this were the case, it wouldn't have launched a 2022 invasion. Really, as in the last 10 years, or especially since 2013-14, as we've seen increasing increasing westward integration in Ukraine, and that is only, I guess, fired up, if you will, Russia's desire to keep Ukraine within its control. Donetsk and Luhansk are easier regions to keep it inside control because it has occupied these places since 2014. So it has been able to control them. It has put in, puppet governments. It has put in their own people there. It has built it in its own way. It is in many ways indoctrinating children, etc. Right? You see this. It's able to control these regions in a way that it would never be able to should it now take new territories. There is the economic element to it in that the resources there, although the reality is these resources likely will not be able to be accessed for arguably a decade at least because of the mines that are in these regions, the fact that these lands have been completely destroyed, these cities completely flattened. I was speaking with a soldier earlier today who just said, there's nothing left. It's just piles of stones left in some of these cities, like Soledar, Mariupol, Bakhmut. There's nothing there anymore because it's just simply stones. Again, there is, I think, the fear, and I think there's a lot of truth to the argument that should these regions be taken by force, Donetsk and Luhansk, or Donbas more largely, that this will only set the stage for further and additional invasions by Russia. And I think this is really important for the world to understand, is that when you validate or legitimize force being used to change the borders of a state in the 21st century, this only then legitimizes further changing of borders by force in the 21st century. And I think this is not a rabbit hole that we really want to go down. Question to ask, and I think is one Ukrainians are asking themselves right now, is what is the value of life as well? And what do you fight for? And I don't know at this point. The trouble is that we don't have a clear answer in that, should you stop fighting, what guarantee is that there will be no more bloodshed? And until there is a firm answer for Ukrainians and they're not going to stop fighting, they won't be able, afford or not. It's just I guess the principle and the fact that people have ties to these land. Their ancestors were buried there for 30 plus years. This is Ukrainian land. So therefore, are all those lives lost in vain to just give up land? I think most important is to think about 2013, 2014, beginning with the Euromaidan revolution. Of course, we saw, from Ukraine's independence, stirrings and real strong sentiments about wanting to be part of the European Union and move towards westward integration. We saw this again in 2004 with the Orange Revolution. But even more importantly, we saw this in 2013 and 14, where Ukrainians repeatedly showed that they were willing to die, and many did, in Kyiv on Maidan, showing that they are committed to their country following a European integration route rather than staying under sort of the control of the Russian government, whatever form that is. And so I think that really was a breaking point and really where these sentiments started to stir, especially with the Russian government didn't want to let go Ukraine. I mean, strategically, of course, because it serves in its eyes as a buffer zone before the West, but even more in a resource sense, right? Economically. Being under Russia's domain is good for Russia, definitely not what Ukrainians want, and definitely not good for Ukraine. But in Russia's eyes, letting go of Ukraine would essentially mean that it no longer is an empire that it once was. And I think that's a very hard fact for any losing empire to accept. I think Zaporizhia, Kherson, and then Mykolaiv towards Odessa would really be what Russia would want, is fundamentally closing Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. And so this would be an argument for why it doesn't, it's happy to just pause the border or the fighting now in order to acquire troops to continue. No, I think what's really important, what I've sort of said though, is just underscoring Ukrainians' voice in this. And I think last week was a real disappointment for many Ukrainians in the fact that their voices were not brought into the conversations. And of course, we don't know what went down in Alaska on Friday. And hopefully today, the conversation will be much more seriously involved with Ukrainians' views. In this case, the army is very much a civilian army. These are volunteers who have risked their lives, who were not previously military. And so with this is that civil society plays a really important role here. They're the ones in many ways funding the war effort, with their own volunteer efforts, with their own capacities. And so giving up lands would really call to question many things, but really importantly, were all those lives lost in vain? What comes with the losing of the lands, or what comes next? Is there some sort of guarantee by NATO that Ukraine will be a member state? Is there a guarantee that NATO will patrol their skies and their borders for the next 100,000 years, right? What comes with it? And I think that unless there is some sort of consolidation that Ukrainians see, at this point, I don't know. I have not seen a proposal by any Western country that would legitimate that. So therefore, I think that if today President Zelensky were to give up those lands, I think there would be considerable upheaval, definitely. But again, this would need to come with some sort of security guarantees because Ukrainians won't stop fighting. Even if the government is mandating their troops out of there, there are many volunteer battalions who will continue to go back in there and fight. So I think this is, yeah, there has to be some sort of security guarantees backing it.
Приходьте. 5-0, як прийняв прийом. Реально без гумору тут не обійтись.
Да,
Ти
можна
пустили нас,
хайдрон.
я карпатський пацан.
Недавно. Поляки Донбас плані. Закладывают туда, укладывают.
Окей, I'm called to.
Вот, давай.
Командир.